Welcome to the Practice You podcast. My name is Elena Brower. Together, we'll explore and enjoy content and conversations around mastering transitions in our relations, our wellness, our careers, our families, and especially in our missions and visions. You are invited to learn and love and listen with me. Welcome to Practice You. Welcome back to the podcast. I have with me two people who have been heroes, icons, teachers of mine throughout my yoga career for the last 22 years from a distance, and a couple of times in person in those basement yoga conference classes back in the day in New York City and San Francisco. Richard Freeman and Mary Taylor, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
It's so nice. It's so nice. We share space on Yoga Glow, and that's how I know your work now. But then, it was a real privilege to study with you at the Yoga Journal conferences. So I just want to say thank you in advance for this and also for that. Richard, you began studying yoga in 1968, and you were focusing on hatha, contemplative Buddhism, and the Ashtanga and Iyengar methods. You now teach, obviously, throughout the world, except for right now. And your video series, which is called Yoga with Richard Freeman, did set the gold standard for modern Ashtanga yoga. Mary, you are studying and practicing yoga since 1972, woman, teaching throughout the world. Wow. I was born in 1970, and I feel like I've been around for a while, so this is a real privilege for me. You co-founded the yoga workshop in Boulder, Colorado, and that was back in 1988. But we're here today to talk about two things, actually. One is your most recent book, When Love Comes to Light. And two, I want to start by thanking you in advance for The Mirror of Yoga, which was your previous book. What I learned from that book is informing, I would say, everything that I've done for the last, I don't know, when did that book come out? Decade ago? 8 years ago? I forget. Something like that. The teaching on ahimsa in that book changed my life, guys. Changed my life. Changed how I look at people. Changed how I look at family. The whole idea that ahimsa is actually a way to remember not to cast anyone out, but actually to just, keep everything in good stead within yourself and don't do too much, but also don't push anything away, literally changed everything for me. So I want to say thank you for that too. But this book is magic. When Love Comes to Light is bringing wisdom from the Bhagavad Gita to life. And I've pulled a lot of quotes from this, and I love to read to my guests some of their own words, and then we can talk about them. Because I think my listener enjoys hearing bits of the book and getting a smattering of what motivated you to write and share that with us. So we'll start like this. Perhaps one day we will look back and see this as the age of extremes that catapulted us into a new age of insight, because beneath this chaos and separatism, woven into the strands of divisiveness that seem to be tearing us apart, there's also a palpable craving for connectedness, truth, and sustainability. I appreciate that so much, more so than ever right now, as we are in, end of September 2020. We are bordering on, chaos, actually, in this world, particularly in this country. And I would love to hear you both, or either one of you, expound on what brings you to that understanding that there is, in fact, this new, beneath this chaos and separatism, there is this palpable craving.
Oh, well, we have a palpable craving.
Same.
And the thing is this, it's always, because that was composed, that was a year and a half ago.
Year and a half ago.
And we didn't have the COVID crisis.
Or the Black Lives Matter, right?
but
Yeah,
still
yeah.
had a lot of suffering going on, and a lot of politics, even within the world of yoga, and then of course just relationships between people all over the world, and then between different lineages of cultures. It's kind of sad, and so we thought, well, not only does the Bhagavad Gita, but the, the depth of any of the real traditions, what they're teaching is relationship with other beings. That if there's any being that you cast out of your heart, even bad one, then it's going to upset you. It's going to and then you won't see them correctly, and you won't be able to communicate with them. You won't be able to help them.
And then also, I feel like that does cause this very serious and real warping, I feel, inside of myself. I've had that experience of casting someone out, and upon reading The Mirror of Yoga, and this also reiterated that in so many ways, I realized that I was harming myself by doing that, and that it was causing it within me a great deal of pain.
That's the real juice in understanding why it is so important to really pause when we are in crises, when we have been, in a situation that is complex, or where we have difficulties with others or political situations, to pause and really tap into something deeper than the immediate reactionary response.
Right.
And you're so right about that, because what then happens when we get that distortion within ourselves is that our actions then feed the flames of discontent and divisiveness and difficulty.
Yeah.
And everyone suffers. And so, you can't start anywhere but within yourself, which is not easy to do. And especially these days, when there's so much unknown, so many, on every level that we look, every front that we are facing, there are difficulties. And so the only thing any of us can do is tap back into the visceral feeling, like Richard said in the beginning, is we wrote this because we felt it.
Right.
You feel this sense, just like you're saying, and you just have to start from there and proceed.
Human suffering and equally hope and kindness are nothing new, you said in the book. Granted, the particulars have changed, but the underlying difficulties and joys being on this remarkable planet in this extraordinary human form are pretty much the same today as they've always been. But if we're lucky, at some point in there, we begin to wake up. We experience the paradox of living alone, encased in this sack of skin we call me, while simultaneously recognizing the immeasurable beauty of being an integral part of a limitless, interconnected, finely tuned web of existence. Quite by accident, and my listener can most likely identify with this particular part, quite by accident, we taste the nectar of trusting the process of life with an open heart and open mind, realizing that we are the center, yet part of a unified whole, separate but not separate at all. This, I think, is one of the finest opening sort of teachings of the book. And we know, obviously, getting into the Bhagavad Gita, into the story, the myth of it, that this is, one of the seminal teachings. We are, Arjuna, the center, yet part of this entirety, separate but not separate at all, having to make choices that are difficult but really necessary. And you go on to say that the passageway toward freedom from suffering turns out to be a process of learning to trust, letting go of habitual patternings of mind, perception, and emotion that keep us trapped in loops of self-absorbed separation. This is where I want to sort of mine both of your experience and expertise, the idea of letting go of habitual patternings of mind, perception, and emotion. This is something I know that my listener is keenly interested in learning from you. And I think it might be interesting for both of you to talk a little bit about your personal experiences of that letting go as you've grown as teachers, as humans.
Well, the very first step is noticing it. and in that section you just read and throughout the book, we make and underscore the point that all of this is a process. So the very first step in that process is actually that whatever it is arises, the habitual pattern arises, and then the next step is, the step you actually engage in is noticing it. And then that can be a period of time that lasts a long time before you get it together or figure out what it is you need to do to actually then take action to change the pattern. Mm-hmm. And then one realizes, and this, is happening for many of us, including me these days sometimes, is habitual patterns of anxiety, fear, or lack of trust bubble back up because they're well-worn ruts of habitual behavior and emotion that are in my nervous system or in your listener nervous system and triggered. And so then you have to notice them again and start over from the beginning.
Right. And if you notice them, you also have a kind of an intuition that they are a story, that it's not actually you, because you are just the process of noticing. That's why that interesting word of trust, which is Shraddha, and Shraddha, and by trust we don't. It's often translated as faith, which it's a translation we don't like because that just means you accept a dogma, and part of your intelligence doesn't accept it. But Shraddha actually means the ability to suspend the need to know in a where you're completely satisfied. And you, in a sense, stunned the mind so that it doesn't have to make any kind of knowledge structure. It's almost like you're looking at stories, you're looking at all the myths of you and the stories of the world, many of which are pretty good, some of them are pretty bad. But if you have this trust, then you're allowed to not know. And in that not knowing, it turns out that there's this extreme I don't know if the word is pleasure, or it's a kind of selfless pleasure or satisfaction that then allows you to act in the world without acting egotistically. So you can, see that each being, each person, or, it doesn't even have to be a person, each being is the center and is precious. You can feel them, deep in your heart.
And how do you work with that, Richard, Mary, both of you? How do you work with that when we look at the political landscape in this country, at least, or really in almost any country? There are a lot of leaders cropping up now who are, really taking advantage of their position, let's say, and really creating a great deal of chaos, divisiveness, precisely the opposite of discriminating awareness is what I mean to say. How do you reckon that? How do you reconcile that within yourself?
So, you have to see them deeply, so that you don't necessarily, you don't want to be sympathetic in the sense you believe they're conspiracy theories or their crazy stories, which
yes.
With. But at the same time, you see the what surrounds them. In other words, you're kind of looking through them, and so that you see you had the same potential in your own mind to be just as demonic or crazy as them, but you don't want to go to that level of suffering.
Right.
And so the Gita is interesting in that, particularly chapter 16, I believe, is on the demonic. And so it talks about psychopathic persons. In fact, Arjuna's cousin at the beginning of the book was a psychopath, very evil, Duryodhana. And
Right.
he had to, and we never find out whether it would be best for him to stand up and fight, because Duryodhana, if he'd win, it would be a terrible thing for humanity. But then, in defeating him, so many would die on both sides, and that also might be worse. And Krishna never actually answers that. He wants Arjuna to look and more deeply. And Arjuna was also a diplomat. And it turns out in the actual story, they did fight. And it was a disaster. But how to deal with that? And so the Gita, really makes you, see to see the kind of evil ways of the psychopath, and to also, if it's skillful, to negotiate with them, or to actually stop them, or to pull. It depends on the circumstances totally for each individual.
And so part of what we're faced with today, this insanity that's going on worldwide in many, many countries, and in the United States in particular. We've been out of the country. We were gone for 8 months and are now back. And it's just shocking to step back in after having been gone during this period of time. And so disheartening. And yet also food for, food for inspiration to work. Because what this allows us is, and what I'm seeing, my personal view of this is that the process of life on this planet is at stake in the world today. And that many of these forces that are sort of coming up in our face. And so the process of life that I'm talking about is environmental crises and the inability to communicate at a time in the world where communication is more easily accessible to masses of people than ever before. The nature of some of the communication channels just been programmed to not communicate necessarily 100% truthfully. And then all of the political difficulties and lies and things that have come up. All of this, from one view, all of this is a response, sort of like a panic response, internationally, globally, to the fact that we cannot go on behaving in the ways we have been behaving in terms of how we communicate with each other, how we separate ourselves out from each other and are not truthful with ourselves or with others that, I care a lot about the suffering of others, but thank God I can be comfortable in my little mansion here on the hill. All of these sort of illusions, which actually go back to habitual patterning, the idea of cultural and culturally emotional and habitual patterns have come to the surface, and it's almost as if they need to be exposed. And as people who've been practicing yoga for a while, or even just for a short time, or people who are simply interested in changing the world, what we can do is what we would do just with our own habitual patterns, is to pause for a moment, look deeply, communicate deeply, be trustworthy, and make steps towards finding connection and not being sucked into the mindset of divisiveness, so that we can all lay our cards out on the table and see the full context of what's going on and behave like civilized human beings to one another. And so for some of the politicians you asked in specifically, how I deal with that is to see them, as Richard was saying, to see their confusion and their suffering, to not necessarily at all buy into it, but to realize that they too are in crisis. This is their response to seeing, oh no, my world is crumbling beneath me. What we can do is be steady and stable, and take action where we can, like voting and sending letters to senators or to politicians saying, I disagree with this, or I agree with that. And to be active in what we're doing, but keep the channel of connectedness, the open-heartedness to one another, even when they're in the face of these extremes that we're being hit by. Because it really is, all of these levels, the calamities of the fires that are currently going on in California, the earthquakes that have rocked different parts of the world, and the hurricanes, etc., and then the political upheavals, all of these things are in our face. Yeah. And we have to come together and realize the only way we're going to make it through is to work together on this.
Yeah. So many pages I want to talk about right now. Page 115, resistance to change, is a sort of layered phenomenon that starts on an interpersonal level, as it does for Arjuna. When we are not operating from a perspective that is in concert with our circumstances, engaged in the effort of paying attention to the most minuscule level of perception of which we're capable, then change appears to be a threat to our very balance and stability. What you're suggesting here is to engage in the effort of attending to the most minuscule level of attention, to become attuned to change, become one who allows for change, and notice all that resistance and wake up to this interconnectedness so that we can trust change and also other. I'm skipping over now to 130 in the book. As the Gita opened, we found Arjuna on the battlefield, we all know this, in a crisis of conscience, faced with the seemingly impossible dilemma of taking one of two courses of action. We're all here right now, each of which seemed flawed. Fight for the cause in which he believes, knowing great harm will come to the many he loves and respects, or to collapse in dismay, sidestepping the problem, all of his responsibilities and his integrity. And in the beginning, this is why I'm so happy to talk to you guys now. In the beginning, these are the only two options he can imagine. But as the story progresses and he rides waves of thought and emotion while allowing himself to trust his beloved teacher and friend, Krishna, he starts to see that the picture is not as completely black and white as he'd first imagined. And perhaps there's a middle path. You go on to say that crises, by definition, are times of change that mandate letting go and trusting the unknown. There are times when the well-established functional and ill-functioning aspects of the ego must take a back seat to the context of the situation, and as such, crises can pose a threat to a strong ego. And this is why we practice yoga. You had mentioned a few pages earlier that every single, I think it was page 88, if I remember correctly, every single time is a time of death. And it's on us right now, if we're choosing ourselves, my listener, as yogis, to accept the fact that there are little parts of us that have to die in order to find our way through this morass, come out in a place of compassion and action at the same time, and take this mythological imagery, this story, and dare question and wake up and take action and do the right thing and vote and whatever side you're on. vote, write letters, take action for the planet, take action for the people of color. This is a real moment in history, and there, at no time has this book been more important or salient, I feel, than right now.
So we're taking action, but we're not 100% sure what the best action is. We just do something, and then we open our hearts to communication to get feedback. It's just like if you're helping someone, if you don't do anything, then obviously it's really bad. And you just take the best shot you have. And if you're not doing it from an ego position, but you actually want to help, you look for feedback. And they say, oh, that didn't quite work because of this or that. And then you go, oh. And without any attachment at all, you upgrade your theories about it, and you gain more knowledge, and you can then act more skillfully. And so the book is really teaching yoga as the skill in action. So it's like an art, but that art requires that you are able to completely let go, realizing that everything around you, even your thoughts, are impermanent. What to speak of your body or the planet or the bodies of any of the participants in these stories.
And when you can be comfortable with the idea of your actions being part of the process of change itself, then you can begin to kind of enjoy the ride, and you have a lot more capacity that's opened up within you to be able to see options and to make choices. And so it really is that's again why it boils down to, learning to trust.
And just in case my listener doesn't know, just in case, this is a hymn. It's a mythological story, often known simply as the Gita or the Bhagavad Gita. And Richard and Mary have sort of given their interpretation of it, let's say, and many are out there, but this is absolutely in my top 3 now. This particular hymn is a section of the Indian epic, which is known as the Mahabharata. Early roots in stories dating back as far as the 8th or 9th century BCE. And the full teaching was later told as a compelling narrative, as you say, stories within stories, filled with deceit and bravery, love and betrayal, puzzles, paradoxes that turned it into a classic text for Hindus and others in search of freedom from suffering. I think the most important aspect is what you've just articulated, Mary, which is it's not about a victory. It's not about some sort of ending. It's teaching us that every possible approach has to culminate in love. It's the title of the book, When Love Comes to Light. What you're offering in this book, you guys, thank you, is that this is a guide for any of us when we find ourselves, as you say, perilously dangling between the horns of dilemma within a crisis or a difficult situation. Should we act or not? How do we know the correct course of action? The call, listener, is to study, learn, be patient, sit back, listen, watch, observe, and notice. You're being led all the time. Something in you, some idea that you have about yourself has to die in almost every interaction in order for you to get through it in a way that stinks of compassion. And whatever the situation is, however ominous it is, however many people are suffering, we have got to put ourselves in the place of knowing that there isn't one answer and there are many actions. What's the best one that we could take right now? That's the big question.
That's exactly it.
Curiously enough, Krishna never answers the game. And at the very end, he says, now that you understand that all beings, and you can see me in all beings and all beings in me, and do what you choose. He says, so you have to look and then stay open for feedback. And so it's so important, the ongoing process of inquiring, like asking good questions, sincere questions in all dimensions of this experience, from the most everyday practical to the most philosophical or religious even.
And to stay physically grounded, to really be embodied and stay connected to the earth through the body, and to be clear in what your intentions are in this world. Right. And to really look at every individual situation with the question in mind: what will serve? What will best serve? And you may be right or you may be wrong, but from your perspective, what will best serve? And then take some action and observe. And sometimes knowing that no action is the appropriate action. Right. And sometimes that's not true. So to really keep assessing and reassessing in that way.
I have one last thing that I wanted to look at with you guys, which is the chapter 7. It's a point of inflection in the story. It's the first place in the Gita where all the 3 gunas are mentioned. I would love for you to share with my listener your take on the theory of the gunas and how that entire body of understanding affected the outcome of the story, if that's something that you could do.
Yeah, one of our favorite lines is guna guneshu vartanta. That means it's just gunas on gunas. And because it sounds so much like the English word goon, I really like it.
Of course.
But what gunas are describing is the process of manifestation of space and time itself and this is what we are always experiencing all day, every day. Everything you experience is a composition of these 3 gunas. And the first one is the tendency of the creative energy to make a thesis or take a stand. And that's called tamas. And then soon thereafter, you get rajas, which is the antithesis. In other words, the background of the mind and whatever the energy is, something in the background says, no, that one thing is not the whole thing. Here are all the other points of view. And so then you have an antithesis, and then you could have a battle between thesis and antithesis until maybe there's communication. And then you get synthesis. And in synthesis, there's this perhaps brief flash that it's this process of, it's almost like a fizzing process of joy in which there's the revealing of consciousness, and there's the revealing that everything is this composition of thesis, antithesis, and then it synthesizes occasionally, which is joyous. And so when we think we're not acting, the Gita reminds you, well, you just blinked, if you're hiding in the closet, not acting, and you cough, well, there was cough, that's an action. And then when you do act, and you take up, the sword of discrimination, or you write the letter to your senator.
Right.
That isn't actually you. That is actually just gunas interfacing with gunas. And this is to remind you of this wonderful process of mind and body that is there are different names for it. And it's just this revelation of this almost infinite beauty, this infinity that's in microscopic detail and then in macroscopic, cosmic phenomenon. So you'd like to say it's just all gunas.
And I would love to hear you lastly talk about the other 2, Rajas and Sattva, I know that several yoga teachers listen to this, and I know that I myself would love to hear you expound on how they layer and alternate, and it's almost like this massive infinite Vesica Pisces where they just keep on shifting and morphing into one another. How does that aspect of tamas when you're not acting and rajas when you are acting come and sort of synthesize into sattva, in your words?
When you're lucky. No, so what's happening is the sattvic synthesis, but often on planes that we're not directly experiencing. And so if you really are lucky and you're, say, in the presence of something that is embodying, in which you start to feel, even the sensation in your skin all over the body as being vibration, rather than, oh, this is a composition of vibration. Or if you, and this often happens when you encounter some innocent being, say like a puppy, or a kitten, or just, somebody you connect to somehow. Then all of a sudden you start to feel the infinity that is both that it's, and then you start to see that the essential nature of all that is unfolding around us is what we would say is joy.
And the essential nature is this sense of harmony, but our mistake as embodied human beings is that we latch on to different parts of the wave pattern of this process of the gunas, right, rolling through things. And we, have attraction to or aversion to parts, and then we want them to be constant or consistent or predictable. Right. And, sometimes it's easy to kind of think about the gunas on the gunas just as what the life cycle or the day cycle of a day is, where, the dawn happens and there's this feeling, and many yogis experience this, where you're up early and the rest of the world is kind of still sleeping, and it is a very sattvic time. But then it starts to deteriorate and starts to kind of either, shift from being this really amazing time of day with cool air and stillness, etc., into a time where things get kind of into habitual patterns and dull. And then something comes along like midday, and it just boots us. It boots you into action. And then by the end of the day, this sort of feeling of harmony starts to manifest again. And then the pattern continues. So it's this natural pattern in our thought patterns, in our sensation patterns, in the world around us, that just goes on all the time.
And it's almost like the tamas. You can't have the whole thing without the tamas. The ego comes in and says, yeah, I do bhakti, and therefore I know the real way. And, initially with, an identification that then the ego co-opted, and now I'm going to make everybody else in the world do it.
Right.
But you start there, and then the game, or the intelligence, the more the intelligence is trained, the sooner you start to see, aha, that's being silly.
And then you can laugh about it. I mean, it's really important.
You have to laugh at your own ego.
Laugh at yourself.
Or your own
Yes.
anger.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
All of the emotions, they're with any embodied being, even the avatars, all of the emotions are there. It's just that because of intelligence, buddhi, they're able to see through them, so they don't get caught up. And then those, like transmuted anger, is a very wonderful clarity mind.
And it's a fuel to allow you to then, let go of your presuppositions and really kind of have your ego spontaneously dissolve, at least for an instant,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
interact with the world around you sincerely and authentically. And that's, and then suddenly that goes away and you're back at square one again.
Yeah, and lust and ambition are wonderful unless there's an object they have. So if you can,
Right.
like, training the mind, training the intelligence with this compassion, then you are able to use, all of these things that were, essentially gates to hell. Then they become extremely useful, because in a sense, even though they're impermanent, they're not going away.
Personally, I have this experience almost every day where I have this latent kind of frustration that sits very familiar within me. And exactly as you said, both of you said it in different ways, but the transmutation of it by having a sense of humor about it and having a sense of humor about the object of whatever it is that I'm frustrated about that turns into anger. That transmutation, that moment where I could have gone that route and didn't, is such a clarity.
Yeah.
It's even clearer sometimes when you do go that route. And
Every now and again, yes. And then I have to apologize. Exactly. Jinx. The very last sort of bit of your interpretation, page 135. We should offer our precious conclusions and our most skillfully crafted knowledge, along with everything else, into the fire of pure awareness as we look again. In this way, we contemplate what is before us openly and honestly, in context of relationship, keeping all things in our hearts, and with a spirit of setting things free. As such, there is no residue, and we can fully embody a dissolution into the limitless spectrum of love's light, so that the ultimate secret of secrets, wisdom, is born. And I think this ties everything up really beautifully. You go on to say a few more things about bhakti and the sort of culmination of this understanding, the non-culmination culmination. But I really appreciate the fact that the secret of secrets, the wisdom, is really just an understanding of oneself, which allows us to act well, whatever well happens to be, appropriately, let's say, that's a better word, whatever the situation is, in accordance with whatever the dharma of the moment happens to be. You finally say that this is the teaching of the Gita that can serve us as we travel our unique and auspicious path through this lifetime, knowing we are intimately intertwined with everything else in search of a mutual awakening. Changes come, emotions bubble up, insights arise, habits slow us down, deaths arrive, sorrows and joys abound, and life goes on. We are faced with crises along the way. They are always part of every journey. Yet it is in the moments of crisis that we find opportunities to wake up to deeper, more connected, kinder, and more compassionate levels of awareness and behavior. Step by step, action by action, thought by counter thought. I love that. Synthesis, antithesis, thesis and antithesis. And breath by breath, there is always the possibility of waking up, coming home to the truth of who we are and what it is we are truly here to do. Lastly, it is at this point when we take refuge in the profound interconnectedness of life and embrace the freedom of releasing concepts and constructs, our ego, that transformation is nourished. It is here too that the brilliance shining out as love, as bhakti, resides. I want to say this to my listener, because this will get released in good time. all of the things that we need to release in terms of concepts and constructs. I'm saying this to myself as well. Whatever you think is the right thing, whatever you think is the real truth, it's all a concept and a construct, both sides. And it's so important to remember that, guys, as you're listening, because if you think that you're right and everything else is wrong, you will end up in the heap of pain. And I just wanted the two of you to speak on that for a moment, because it's such a fraught time in our history. And I think this is the most important thing that we can remember right now.
And you will cause great pain and suffering to others. So you will, and then that will compound your experience of your own pain. Because really, truly, if any of us, even the demonic, those who would be looked at as demonic in the Gita, the thing that makes us happy is that we are connecting to others and that we are serving others, that what we do makes others happy, and that in turn makes us happy, that there is tenderness of heart and authentic connection. No matter how brilliant your insights or ideas are, if you stick too firmly to them under every circumstance, no matter what, unyielding, that action in and of itself will cause great harm to others and to you too. So it's so important to really set it all down. In other words, just, we have these amazing vehicles called our bodies, where we can really tune into gut instincts, gut feelings, and the feeling of love. And those can be the guides. And then the intelligence rides on them rather than the actions being directed from above in our minds. Let them be directed from the heart.
So, yeah, any formula that you have, even if it's an excellent formula, they call those dharmas, you have to put it down. They say you should put it down and you sacrifice it or you expose it to the pure intelligence or pure awareness. Because the formulation itself is just a construction, and it can't quite say what it's trying to say. There's complex metaphors are involved, myths, and it's very important. Even your best plans and your best collection of words, your best scriptures, even if they come from other planets, you have to place them, and the metaphor is you place them on the altar of just pure awareness, and then you let it go. You say, here, I let it go, and in the letting of it go, you experience that profound pleasure, because you're letting it go just to share the whole universe with all other beings. Otherwise, it's the ego slips in, and you can never upgrade your dharmas, your theoretical positions, even if they're wonderful and didn't come from you. You can never upgrade them until you put them down and let them go. Because there's a saying that the pleasure actually comes from letting things go rather than clinging on to them.
The end of this book is where you guys offer these very embodied exercises. It's an appendix. And I think this is kind of the best part of the book, even though all of it is so utterly dog-eared and marked up already. You say that since one of the primary teachings of the Gita is the importance of tangible contemplative practices that enable us to embody and thereby fully assimilate the teachings, this appendix of embodiment exercises at the end reflect the essential themes from the Gita. And this is, I think, for any yoga teacher listening, a crucial book to grab, because when you look at the pairings of the exercises that Richard and Mary are offering, pairing with certain chapters, it is so useful in this moment to look at how these teachings and the practices that are offered can literally shift everything about your dug in heels and thinking. I can't actually get over how useful they are. Page 281, last thing I promise, then I'm letting you go. Step by step, Dharma, intention, and motivation. This is what you pair with chapter 10. It is often said that through yoga and meditation, we're not learning new ways of being, but rather we are peeling away layers of habitual behavior that keep us confused, stuck, and out of touch with who we truly are on a deep level. Contemplative practices are not ways of learning, but of unlearning. This is so important. You offer this following exercise as a series of contemplative contemplations designed to give insight into who you are as a part of the bigger picture of life. I think this is never more critical than right now. And you walk us through, and I'm not sorry, my listener. It's page 282 in the book, and I am not going to tell you what it is because it's so good. It's helped me so much in the last several days. There are questions to ask. There's an actual sort of meditation to do, which you just read, and instantly you're in there because you can just hear Richard's voice and Mary's voice. And once you've established the grounds for understanding what strikes you as your essence through this practice, who you are, what your purpose is, then, as Mary said earlier, you can feel that you are in a grounded, steady, sturdy, stable place, and you can take action accordingly, especially right now because so much of it is in our heads and in our phones. Get back into your body. And I feel this book is an absolutely critical aspect of my wellness right now. So just a giant, huge thank you. So much respect for both of you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you for leading it.
And thank you for really what you're offering to everyone through other, your work in the world. It's important. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. And more again soonest. Thank you for everything.